brought Rainbow Brite to meet you.
Rainbow Brite? Who's she?
She's my friend, and she has the power of the rainbow to make you happy.
Strawberry shortcake, my, she's looking swell. Cute little doll with a strawberry smell. Oh, jazz, making music. Wow, that's truly, truly, truly our girls have got a secret glow. Right, Barbie? Dream glow, Barbie. Ruffles and lace to wear any place.
Hello doll fans and welcome back to Beauty Inside a Box. Today we are talking about dolls of the 1980s. This is a series of videos on my channel where I go through each individual decade and talk about all of the dolls that would have been lining the toy aisles. I'll put a link to the Dolls of the Decade playlist in the description so you can check out the other videos in this series once you've watched this one, of course. Also, if you love dolls as much as I do, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Also, don't forget to check me out on Instagram and TikTok and check out my Patreon. I have 7 exclusive videos on my Patreon at the moment, and I'm currently working on a new one. Subscription starts from just $3 and your support would mean everything. But anyway, let's talk about the 80s. The 80s were a larger-than-life decade. The hair was big, the spandex was tight, and the colours were neon. Teen-orientated culture had a massive boom in the 80s. Teens were flocking to the 2,500 malls that had popped up in America. Cinema capitalised on teen culture with films like Back to the Future, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and The Breakfast Club. There was also a massive leap forwards in technology, including the popularization of home video game consoles, personal computers, and the invention of VHS and the Walkman. The invention and popularization of cable TV made way for hundreds of new and exciting specialized channels like MTV. There was also entire channels devoted to kids programming and cartoons, which advertisers could use to promote the latest toys. It wasn't long before the cartoons themselves even became advertisements for the latest toys, with shows like Transformers, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, Care Bears, and Jem and the Holograms. The world's population grew by 1 billion, which meant in the 80s there were loads more kids, and all these kids needed toys, including dolls. So let's look at some of the totally radical to the max dolls which rose to popularity in the 1980s. Of course, we have to start by talking about Barbie. Barbie, of course, had a massive presence in the 1980s. The over-the-top style of the time suited her perfectly. At the start of the decade, Black and Hispanic versions of Barbie were released, which was a massive step forwards for diversity in the Barbie line at the time. The Dolls of the World line was introduced in 1980. Peaches and Cream Barbie was released. And this Barbie doll was famously painted by Andy Warhol. This really solidified Barbie as a pop culture icon. Other famous Barbies from the 80s include Great Shape Barbie, Day to Night Barbie, Barbie and the Rockers, Crystal Barbie, Western Barbie, Astronaut Barbie, Animal Lovin' Barbie, and Dream Glow Barbie. Barbie was of course the #1 fashion doll of the 80s, but there was quite a lot of competition in the 80s. For example, Strawberry Shortcake is a character created by American Greetings. She originally appeared on a Valentine's card in 1972 and was so popular that by 1979, American Greetings licensed the character to Kenner to create dolls and other toys.
Strawberry Shortcake in her friends collection. 4 little dolls sold separately. Apple Dumpling with Tea Time Turtle has an apple smell.
Huckleberry Pie has a huckleberry smell. Blueberry Muffin has a blueberry smell. Berries, berries!
Strawberry Shortcake, Huckleberry Pie, Apple Dumpling, and Blueberry Muffin sold separately.
The dolls are absolutely adorable and have really, really cute names. They're all named after desserts. It's like Apple Dumpling, Blueberry Muffin, Huckleberry Pie, Orange Blossom, and Raspberry Tart. They were all scented as well. Strawberry Shortcake has had several reboots over the years. In particular, I remember the reboot from 2002, but none of the reboots have been quite as popular as she was in the 80s. Cherry Berry Muffin was a line of dolls released by Mattel between 1988 and 1990, which is definitely feels like Mattel is trying to copy Strawberry Shortcake. Let's be honest. They were also themed around different desserts, and they were also scented, and they were also 6.5 inches tall. Lady LovelyLocks and the Pixie Tales was another creation from American Greetings, which was licensed to Mattel. Mattel probably annoyed that they missed out on Strawberry Shortcake. Anyway, from 1987 to 1989, and Mattel created dolls and other toys. The dolls were approximately 8.5 inches tall and had beautiful, long, colourful hair and cute, frilly dresses. They also came with Pixie Tails, which were little plastic creatures with long, colourful tails, which you could use as like colourful hair extensions. Such a random idea, but very whimsical, very fun, very 80s. A short-lived animated series was created to advertise the dolls. Get used to that, because pretty much every single doll line on this list had an animated series created to like advertise it. I actually love these dolls. I really want to find a Lady LovelyLocks doll on eBay one day. This like frilly, feminine, pastel aesthetic from the 80s is definitely one of my favorite aesthetics. These aren't really fashion dolls, but I couldn't make a video about the 1980s without talking about My Little Pony. My Little Pony was released by Hasbro in 1982. The line was the successor to the line My Pretty Pony from 1981. My Little Pony was distinct from the original line because the ponies were smaller and they came in these like unnatural pastel colours. And of course they had their iconic cutie marks on their side. I don't need to tell you how popular My Little Pony was and, you know, still is to this day. The reboot My Little Pony Friendship is Magic absolutely dominated the 2010s. Moondreamers were a line released by Hasbro in 1986. They also had a short-lived animated series which aired in the same programming block as My Little Pony. They were 5.5 inches tall and had a celestial theme, which meant lots of moons, lots of stars, lots of metallic colours. The line seems to have quite abruptly been cancelled because you can still find loads of images online of dolls that were advertised but never produced. I love these. I actually love these. And the packaging is so 80s and whimsical. I love these colours. The 80s packaging for the dolls was incredible. It was out of this world. Like, I can't help but feel like if they packaged dolls like this today, they would still be really successful because the colours are just so enticing. Spectra was another short-lived space-themed doll line, this time created by Mattel in 1987. The tagline for these dolls was lacy, spacey, and out of this world. Have you ever heard anything more 80s? I actually have a Spectra doll and I'm obsessed. Like, I was scouring eBay to try and find one. I think they're so cool. Unique features of these dolls include the fact that they have like human faces, but then these like metallic, robotic looking bodies, which are just so iconic. And of course, because it's the 80s, they have a massive fringe and big, frilly, lacy dresses. Look at the eye makeup as well. I love these dolls. Interestingly, pretty much every single mold used here was recycled from the Barbie line. Okay, this is another doll line which is kind of not really a fashion doll. In a video about the 80s, I had to talk about these dolls. These are Cabbage Patch Kids. They were released by a company called Coleco Industries in 1982. They were originally going to be called Little People, but Fisher-Price owned that name, so Cabbage Patch Kids was chosen. The dolls had soft bodies and vinyl plastic heads. At the time, some people considered these dolls ugly. And I can see why they'd say that. They have very, like, smushed heads. But I think they're cute. I think there's something very endearing about these dolls. The dolls were generally between 9 and 16 inches. They were later acquired by Hasbro in 1988, then Mattel in 1994, and they are now produced by a company called Wicked Toys. Since the 80s, they've been made by, like, pretty much every toy company on the planet. Cabbage Patch Kids were incredibly successful and apparently broke every single toy industry sales record for 3 years running. Wow. Coleco even had to cancel their advertising for the dolls at one point because they couldn't keep up with demand. In 1982 alone, they shipped 3.2 million dolls, and the dolls made $2 billion in sales in 1984 alone. The dolls are also kind of famous for the fact that they caused literal riots in stores when they were released. Parents would queue up outside the shops and then stampede towards these dolls, sometimes getting into physical fights trying to obtain the dolls. All the dolls were apparently different from each other as well, which made them feel unique. They also had birth certificates, and the process of purchasing one was often referred to as adopting them. There was even a Cabbage Patch Kids hospital in Cleveland where you could go and adopt a doll in person. Kind of a weird concept, but okay. I could definitely make a whole video deep dive into Cabbage Patch Kids because there's so much lore. Coleco attempted to make another doll line in 1987 called Princess Magic Touch. These were small dolls which came with a charm which could be opened and transformed when touched by their little magic wands. Rose Petal Place was a line of dolls released by Kenner in 1984. Each doll was 6.5 inches tall, and they were themed around different flowers. They were also scented. They were kind of similar to Strawberry Shortcake. I feel like quite a few of the dolls on this list are derivative of Strawberry Shortcake. Rainbow Brite was a media franchise released by Hallmark Cards in 1983, and in 1984, Rainbow Brite was licensed to Mattel so they could create a line of dolls. Similar to Cabbage Patch Kids, the dolls normally had plastic vinyl heads and soft fabric bodies and were about 12 inches tall. There was, of course, an animated series produced by Deke Entertainment. And I remember seeing the VHS when I was a kid at my local library and being like absolutely mesmerized by the bright colors and the adorable character designs. I was like, who is she? She is the moment. There have been several attempts to reintroduce Rainbow Brite over the years, but none have been as successful as the original release. I'm pretty sure Rainbow Brite is actually celebrating her 40th or something anniversary at the moment. Yeah. Jem and the Holograms is one of the most iconic and fondly remembered doll lines from the 1980s, but they were actually only produced in 1986 and 1987. The doll line was never that successful. People remember it being more of a staple of the 80s than it actually was. I desperately want a Jem in the Holograms doll. I'm quite consistently searching for them on eBay, but it's very hard to find one in the box, and I want to get it in the box. The line was produced by Hasbro, and it focused on Jerrica and her pop star alter ego, Jem. The line was unfortunately in direct competition with Mattel's Barbie and the Rockers line. I made a whole video about this rivalry. I'll put a link in the description and a link on the screen somewhere so you can watch it. The dolls were 12.5 inches tall, so slightly taller than Barbie dolls. They often came with a cassette which featured one of Jem's original songs. The Jem animated series was the #1 ranked syndicated cartoon series in November 1986. In 1987, it was the third most watched children's program in syndication with 2.5 million viewers weekly. So the cartoon was very successful. The doll line, not so much. Even though the cartoon was initially incredibly popular, it didn't manage to translate into doll sales, which of course was Hasbro's intention, so the franchise didn't last very long. I think these dolls are so fondly remembered because they like perfectly encapsulate the color and energy of the 1980s. I'm talking about the 1980s like I was there. I wasn't even born. Hasbro tried to replace Gem with a new fashion doll line called Maxie in 1988. Maxie was the same height as a Barbie doll, and I'm assuming could also fit Barbie's clothes. She had a much more kind of regular, everyday style and appeal compared to Gem. She was just like your typical LA teen. She also, of course, had an animated TV series. But neither the TV series or the doll line were very successful, and the line was cancelled in 1990. To directly compete with Maxie, Mattel introduced Jazzie, Barbie's cousin, in 1988. She also encapsulated that like 90s interest in teen culture. She was also discontinued. She lasted a little bit longer than Maxie. She lasted until 1992. Seawees were released by Kenner in 1979 and were produced until 1984. These were like adorable little mermaid dolls, and they were all different colors and stuff. They're really cute. I really, really like them. You know what? You don't see many like mini dolls. I think there's a hole in the market at the moment for like mini dolls. Most of the dolls came with sponges that they could like float on top of. There were also Seawees with pets and babies and tropical themed dolls and ice themed dolls, and they had a lagoon playset. These dolls are really cool. There were a couple more small dolls that were similar to the Seawees, like the Shimmers by Kenner in 1986. Sachets by Galoob, also from 1986. Star Fairies by Tonka in 1985. Sweetie Pops by Playskool in 1986. And Hollywoods in 1987. There were lots of miniature dolls being made around this time. Okay, so these are very, very interesting dolls. They're called Special Blessings, and they were released by Kenner in 1988. These dolls could kneel and put their hands together in prayer. Adorable. These actually got mixed reactions from religious groups. Some thought it kind of trivialized prayer. Others liked the fact that it was promoting prayer. Anyway, Flower Fairies were released from 1983 to 1989 by Hornby, and they were adorable little dolls. They were all themed around flowers. Another flower-themed doll, a similar line, was the Flower Princesses, which were released in 1982 to 1989. Hot Looks dolls were released by Mattel in 1987 to 1988. They were 19-inch dolls with soft bodies and wire armatures inside with vinyl plastic heads. 19 inches, that's pretty big. Each doll represented a different nationality, and there was information on the back of the box which explained how to color match the color temperature to each skin tone, which was a big trend on TikTok recently, actually. Always Sisters were an interesting line of dolls released by Kenner in 1988. They were released in 4 sets of 3 sisters. The sisters had different heights between 14 and 22 inches. Again, really big dolls. She-Ra, Princess of Power, was released as a spin-off line to He-Man action figures, released by Mattel from 1984 to 1987. They were 5.5-inch tall dolls with brushable hair and some removable fashion. But most of their clothes were just like painted onto their bodies. They were kind of a hybrid fashion doll action figure mashup. I actually made a whole video about action figure fashion dolls. Feel free to watch that. I'll put a link on the screen and in the description. Golden Girls and the Guardians of the Gemstones were a very short-lived doll line released by Galoob from 1984 to 1985. They were extremely similar to the She-Ra dolls. They were 6 inches tall, so half an inch taller than She-Ra. Each doll was themed around a different gemstone, which I actually think is quite a cool idea. PJ Sparkles was a line of dolls released by Mattel from 1988 to 1991. The original PJ Sparkles was a 15-inch tall doll which had lighting up accessories. Similar to pretty much every doll line on this list, PJ Sparkles had an animated TV special. But fun fact about this TV special, Jodie Benson, who famously voiced The Little Mermaid, also voiced PJ Sparkles.
So here I am tonight, just waiting for starlight, facing the clouds.
Dolly Surprise were a line of dolls released by Preschool and Hasbro between 1987 and 1990. They were 10 inches tall and had ponytails that could grow longer and shorter by 3 inches when you rotated their arm. That was a very popular gimmick in the dolls of the 1970s, if I remember correctly. In 1989, Hasbro released the rather unimaginatively named doll line, My Beautiful Doll. These were 17.5 inches and fell into a category of dolls which all came out in the late 80s, early 90s, which all looked really similar. Other dolls that I think look kind of similar were like PJ Sparkles and Sweet Sea by Tomy in 1985 and Sweet Treats by Matchbox in 1989. Sindy was also still being released in the 1980s, and this was around the time she started to look more and more and more like Barbie. They gave her more of an American look. So there we have it, doll fans. I spoke about nearly every single fashion doll that was popular in the 1980s. Let me know in the comments if I missed one of your favorite fashion dolls. Let me know what you thought about the dolls I mentioned on this list. Also, don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to my channel if you're new here, check me out on Instagram and TikTok, and check out my Patreon. Support me on Patreon, it would be much appreciated. Anyway, have a totally radical day, doll fans, and I'll see you real soon. Bye! Thank you to Siren Kelly, Sunny, Bobby, Cheryl, Imani, Tracy, Jico, Patty Heiss, Anna, Jordan, Cynthia, Raina Ray, Petra, Desi, Michael, and @dolls_on-the-go. And thank you to all my other Patreon supporters. Your support means everything.